This is footage I recently shot from the Canon XF200. The Canon XF200 was released back in 2014. It is now 2024, so I want to know, does the Canon XF200 still hold up today after 10 years? I've owned this camera for about 8 years. I didn't get it when it first came out because it was $3,900 when it was first released. But now, how does it hold up? I still own this camera, but I've owned other cameras since then. And the XF200, I must say, is a great HD camcorder. But spoiler alert, it does not hold up that much in 2024 to 4K cameras. Here are the reasons why I first purchased the Canon XF200 and why I thought it was a great HD camcorder. The first is the body design was perfect for me. Here is an ergonomic hand grip that wasn't on any Canon camcorder up until this point. This rotated about 90 degrees and it was perfect for handheld use. You could go all day with this and have zero fatigue. Sony has something similar to this, and then the Canon cinema cameras have something similar to this, but no other camcorder had this ergonomic hand grip. And there were physical buttons everywhere. This camera had a switch to turn the camera on and off. A lot of cameras nowadays have a button that you have to hold for 2 seconds to turn on. This one had a switch. I like the switch much better. And all of the exposure controls, physical buttons that you can press to control them, even on the inside. And they're customizable as well. And there were also these traditional gain and white balance buttons, little toggle switches. You have 3 buttons to start the recording. You have one on the hand grip, you have one on the handle, and then you have one record button on the body itself. 3 ways to start the recording, physical buttons. And the codecs, you had the MXF codec. The MXF was more metadata friendly, and then it also could do MP4 at the same time. And then with the bit rates, you had 50 megabits at 422. It was 8-bit, but it was 422 color space in HD. You couldn't have other camcorders in this price range at this time to have 422 8-bit. This camcorder shot to compact flash. You had dual compact flash cards, which at the time was a big deal, but in retrospect now, compact flash cards are pretty much, they're not in any kind of camcorders. But you had compact flash cards for this, and then you also had the SD card, but it only recorded to MP4. This was the redundancy, lower bit rate. Then you had this battery, which the one that was included, this smaller battery, it lasts about 4 hours of battery life. And then you could even buy the bigger batteries, which would probably, I haven't clocked it, but I'm assuming it lasts double the amount of the battery that came with the camcorder. But these batteries were expensive, but they lasted all day. And then you had included the charger, battery charger, that also had a connection to do the AC power to the camcorder. You had XLR and 3.5 millimeter jacks that would give you 4 channels of audio. Yes, in 2014, the XF200 gave you 4 channels of audio, 2 XLR and then 2 stereo. And here are the controls, the physical controls where you can control the XLR mic, and then the built-in mics, and then the 3.5 mil jack was controlled with the menu system. Then when it came to the lens, you had a f1.8 to 2.8. And here is the lens hood that you could detach, and it also came with a lens cap. The lens went from around a 26.5-ish millimeter wide angle to a 575 millimeter zoom lens. And when you zoomed all the way in, it was a f2.8. So f2.8 is still a lot of light. So you have a lot of 4K cameras now that started at f2.8. And here you had the full telephoto that ended at an f2.8. Some of my few negatives with this camcorder is that to control the shutter speed and gain, you had to go into the menu or use this toggle switch to really dial in the shutter speed. You can dial in the iris with the ring, but the shutter speed you had to do with this little knob. And then also when it came to the neutral density filters, they are a gradation, built-in gradation neutral density filter. It wasn't mechanical. So the neutral density filter kicked in once you started to stop down the lens, and you couldn't enable the ND filter at a lower or a higher f-stop. So if you wanted to shoot at a 1.8 in bright sunlight and then enable the neutral density filters, you could not do that with this setup. You would have to, the only way the neutral density filters would be enabled is once you pass a certain f-stop, which is not desirable if you want really shallow depth of field in bright daylight. Brief history of the Canon XF camcorder line. It all started back in 2008 with the Canon XF300. I first noticed this camera, I was at the airport, and there was a celebrity at the airport at the same time I was there, and I saw all these paparazzi, the TMZ, and they were trying to film the celebrity. And I noticed that the videographers at TMZ, they were all using the Canon XF300. Then after the XF300, they took a step backwards. Canon took a step backwards with the XF100. This came out in 2011. This was just a single 1/3 inch chip sensor. The big selling point with the XF100 was the price point, and then also it still maintained the 422 50 megabits codec. And most notably for me, there was a documentary called My Life, directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, and it was made by the wife of Nicholas Winding Refn, the director. If you look at the poster for this documentary, she's holding what I think is the Canon XF100. After the success of the XF100 and the XF300 came the XF200. Now this came out in 2014. This was supposed to be a bigger upgrade to the XF100 and the XF300, but this was one of the camcorders that wasn't as popular. Then in 2017, the XF line kind of merged with the AX line, and that's where you got the XF400. Then the next year in 2018 came the Canon XF705, and the difference between the XF705 and the 400, besides just the massive body, was the internals, what it could do, which had different codecs and 10-bit at 422. And then the most recent XF camcorder is the XF605. This came out in 2021. Now this you would think it's a step backwards from the XF705, but in many ways it is a step forward because of the internals. And now here are some random HD clips from the XF200. Let's look at a test with different camcorders versus the XF200. Here's the Panasonic X1500. Now, this is a 4K camera. I'm shooting in 4K, but I'm trying to match settings or exposure settings to the XF200, which is at an f2.8. It's at the lowest gain, and it's shooting optimal as according to the waveform exposure settings. And the Panasonic, I'm matching a 2.8 f-stop, but you can see because it's a little bit smaller sensor that it's darker. Now here is the Canon V10, which is a 1-inch sensor, and it's shooting at an f2.8. Now this is a vlogging camera, a $400 vlogging camera, and there's not a lot of manual settings I can do here, but I did dial in f2.8. It's at a 24p 1/50th shutter speed, but I can't control the colors. It's a standard color picture profile, And this is what it looks like compared to the XF200. XF200 I have not touched since the Panasonic camcorder. Now this is the Canon R7 with a 14 to 35 f4. I am shooting Canon log, and I put a LUT on there, the Canon LUT. It does look a little darker, and that's because the lens I'm using is a 14 to 35, and the widest it can be is an f4. So I'm shooting an f4 versus an f2.8, so you can see an exposure difference, but this is 4K. The R7 is shooting 4K at the highest codec and bit rate. Finally, I thought it would be fun to use a smartphone. This is the Samsung S24 Ultra, which is one of the better camera smartphones out there right now, but I'm shooting it in 8K. This is 8K versus HD on the Canon. And with the Samsung, I can't really control the f-stop, but I tried to control everything else manually. This is what proper exposure looks like on the camera, according to the waveforms on the camera. And then now I'm going to turn off the light so you can see what the grain looks like when it's proper exposure, but then there's no light of the scene. Okay, now I'm going to take you through all of the dBs of gain. It's at 0. Here's at 3 dBs of gain. This is 6 dBs of gain. This is 9 dBs of gain. 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, and 33 dBs of gain. 33 makes it pretty bright, but I would say this is very unusable. So let me close down the shutter, or the iris. Let me go down to... I'll go down to a 2.8, and then I'm going to find the right gain to keep it as. So 33 was too much. Let's go down to an 18 dBs of gain. 18 dBs of gain looks okay. Let me just go to 24. Or yeah, 24. 24, this is where the whites are clipping a little bit at 100. But this would be maybe a little bit too high. I'm going to go down to 21. Okay, now this is proper exposure. And this is how much grain it would look like if you had no lights and you just had to film something at 2.8.